I'm John Robison. I'm an autistic adult who grew up before autism was recognized.
The awareness that autism and the acceptance that autism is receiving at the moment at last opens the door to asking questions and also stating, I have an issue with a big crowd or a mall or a noisy environment. These are my reasons. I'm autistic or I've got sensory processing disorder. Can we go later at night when there are less people? I think just opening up as well, even from a young age, I think that advocacy is much more accepted nowadays, which is, it's about time. But teaching our youngsters that you can say no to a social event, you can ask for a different type of event, or you can take your sensory backpack or something with you. But just from a young age, knowing that it's absolutely fine to have these sensory issues and challenges, and there are ways to cope throughout different social interaction or different environments.
I think that that's really true. I think that if you learn acceptable behaviors, and the other thing which my grandfather would always say to me, which I now realize is very wise. He would always say, boy, you won't ever get in trouble keeping your mouth shut. And that's kind of true. You can just make a pleasant expression and be quiet, and you seldom will irritate people. And that's the thing. If you learn how to behave in ways that don't irritate people, there's that much more opportunity for your good qualities to show through. And your good qualities will very quickly push aside the unexpected behaviors that might otherwise have been offensive.
Yes, I think I've got a personal story here. So my life partner is autistic, and we would walk around in a neighborhood, and it's a very small neighborhood, and everybody would stop and say hi. It's like a small town syndrome. And in the beginning, he would just walk past because he's got nothing to say to them. It's not his friends. And I asked him nicely, politely, please just make contact, like say something. So he's taught himself to say three things, something like a hi, so a greeting, something about the weather, and some type of joke that usually coincides with the weather. So
yeah.
And it works, he's got that social interaction, and there's no awkwardness. He's got his 3 rules that he follows. He's happy, they're happy.
I do the very same thing. I've taught myself to say, hey, it's good to see you. How are you doing? Things like that. And it works. Yeah. I just, you don't need a large stock of phrases. And again, I would stress that is a genuine thing. I'm not pretending something I'm not. I'm just uttering a greeting to comfort the other person. Yeah. And the other person is presumably greeting me for the same reason.
No, it is like that. And it's also opening up that conversation of it isn't that scary to speak to people because there are certain parameters that he's got. So he knows, okay, I'm speaking to them for a limited amount of time. It is just to open that conversation. This leads me actually into a question about anxiety, because we see that a lot of our kids are dealing with anxiety from a young age. And I feel and this is, I don't know if you have any advice for parents or clinicians on how to work through this anxiety with our kids.
I think that it's important for parents and clinicians to understand that there are good reasons for anxiety among autistic people. It is not that there's nothing wrong with us, we have easy lives, so why on earth are we anxious? In fact, if you're a young person especially, and the thing you want most of all in the world is for other kids to like you, then when other kids laugh at you and they run away and they don't pick you for their teams and stuff, what are you going to feel except miserable? When you come up and you pick something up, and some other kid says, "Hey, give that back. That's mine." Or you just cut in front of me in line, or you did this, you did that. You're constantly realizing that you did the wrong thing. So what would you expect if not, that you would be highly anxious anytime you go into a situation? You're going to be thinking, is she going to get mad at me? Is he going to get mad at me? Am I doing something wrong that's going to get me in trouble? And then when it fails, you think, oh, it just went bad once again, and of course you're miserable. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a little bit of a simplification, but it's absolutely accurate. That's what drives anxiety and depression in us. And then, at a more basic level, science is telling us that there are mechanisms in our brains that may make us biologically more vulnerable or more able to reinforce those feelings in our heads. And so I think that if you're asking, what natural thing can I do to cure or help my child or patient or client? The thing you can do is you can introduce them to environments where they can feel successful at a thing they did. Mm-hmm. They can make a picture, or they can make or solve a puzzle, and they can feel they did a good job. It was a success, not a failure. Mm-hmm. You can put them in interactional situations with other people where whatever they say, the other person responds appropriately and doesn't make fun of them, doesn't call them names. Mm-hmm. And they can have interactional successes. And that will make them feel like they don't have to be scared every time they approach a person.
Yeah, I think.
And I will also say that that's one reason that many autistic children feel more comfortable around older people, because older people often have more cognitive abilities in that regard. So if a little kid might, just yell at them or whatever, an older person might be able to be more understanding. Mm. So I think that is important and true advice.
Yeah. I think this brings me into two things, actually. I spoke to Dr. Temple Grandin not long ago, and she also mentioned the importance of working with your child's interests. So if they are interested, like she was interested in horses, go to a horse farm, study horses. So she was interested in cows, learning about cattle, and really delving into their interest or their hobbies, because there are people that are going to think the same as you, that are going to speak your language and understand your love for whether it's electronics or trains or whatever it may be. And then the second thing would definitely be to find, for me at least, is mentorship is so important with the work that we do, where we help our kids. And I think this works well with what you said with having an older person, because we understand as adults that the things that you are bullied for when you're younger might become a career when you're older. And I think you also mentioned this. You said, if you had advice, I think I remember you saying, if you had advice for younger people, 10-year-olds or 15-year-olds diagnosed with autism, would be, if you are, you might be bullied for whatever you're interested in now, but they're going to love you for it later with the head of a computer programming organization.
I think that's true. And so I think, to speak to what Temple told you, I agree that parents should work with their children's interests to help them learn. But I also think that parents might consider that there is a whole universe of things to be interested in that may be outside their own sphere of interest. So how would, for example, a kid in a small rural village in Portugal ever get a sense that he might have a wonderful aptitude for designing integrated circuits for a company like Intel or Toshiba? How could he possibly know that in that village? But the answer is, you could bring a child from anywhere. You could bring them into museums, you could bring them to technology fairs, you could bring them to career fairs. You could be bringing a kid who's 13 years old to a college career fair and just say, these are the kinds of things that people do when they're 5, 6 years older than you, and they're all things you could be thinking about. And I didn't know the first thing about electronics until my parents bought me an electronics kit, and that launched me on a career. And I think that's a perfectly good example of that.
Yeah.
So it's great, like Temple said, to reinforce your kids' interests, but it's also important to expose them to many different things so they can learn what their interests actually are.
Yes, expand on it. That is such a true point, because we work at AIMS, we work with our kids' interests. So whether it is, if it is something to do with dinosaurs, we'll work on the dinosaur theme and help them to learn all these different concepts, whether it is academic skills through their interest. But that can lead into a lot of different fields. It doesn't need to just be learning about dinosaurs. It can be in animals, and you can expand on it for sure. We do find parents saying that, okay, my child's not interested in anything. I mean, that is we just need to expose them to various topics and concepts.
I think if your child's not interested in anything, I think it would be reasonable to ask if your child might not be just really seriously depressed. And if your child is seriously depressed, you may need some kind of intervention for that before you can make progress with the other.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good point too. Are there any other books coming out soon?
I don't have any other books in the works right now. I've come to feel in the last 5 years or so that it's been 20-some years since my own autism diagnosis, and for most of those 20-some years I've been involved in autism and now neurodiversity advocacy. So when I first began speaking, and even when I wrote Look Me in the Eye in 2006, the buyers of that book at that time were mostly parents who found inspiration in the book for their children. And many of those parents, when they picked up that book back then, they didn't know any autistic people of my age. Now, of course, we realize that there are autistic people my age everywhere around us. It's just that most of them still don't know they're autistic. But we're absolutely out there. And I think that the kids that the parents were raising when they read Look Me in the Eye, they are now young adults. And those people have their own voices, and they're speaking out with their own experiences. And I think that their experiences are in a number of ways different from mine. Kids today are growing up after receiving, in some cases, years of ABA therapy to normalize them and make them behave differently. Nobody did any of that sort of therapy to me. So the way I was raised is kind of different from the way many of the young adults today are raised, and therefore today's young adults have certainly very valid concerns that apply to their generation that are not mine. And I feel like they are increasingly speaking out, and I think that it is, their turn to step up and take over the advocacy torch. Okay. So I really feel like we have a lot of young autistic advocates who are out there in the world talking, and I guess I feel less need to write and speak out because of the profusion of autistic voices that has emerged.
Well, from a professional's point of view, I definitely still need your voice, please.
Well, I think that I have useful advice to offer, and I certainly continue in my academic roles, my teaching appointments here in the United States, and I probably will continue traveling and speaking in other countries. But I do think that there's room for other voices, and I want to make room for that. At the same time, I don't think that I'm, just like going to disappear entirely.
Okay, that's good.
I just think that there are other people whose words should be heard just as much as mine.
Yes, and you raised a very valid point about people going through therapy that was traumatic for them. We stepped away from ABA at a very early age, and we, like I said earlier, we started speaking to autistic adults and said, okay, what do you want in your therapy? What do you wish you had? And I think that's very important, because to feel in control of your own therapy is extremely important for the road of just understanding yourself. I think if you go to a psychologist with any other challenge in your life, the psychologist should hopefully ask you, what do you want? Where do you see yourself going?
Well, I think so, and I hope that we continue sort of down the road, building awareness and acceptance of people whose brains are different. And I think that we are now moving in the direction where, instead of just seeing autism as a disability, we're starting to see autism as a medical term that describes a disability that goes hand in hand with a set of neurological differences that have been a part of humanity forever, because they confer advantages on some individuals and they confer powerful advantage to the human tribe. And I would say not even the human tribe, because some of the genetic differences associated with autism are found in our primate relatives today, meaning that those things emerged in us before we were even what are called modern humans. So these are very, very long-standing and stable differences within us. In some of us, they are expressed as very profound disability. In others, they are expressed as wonderful gifts. In most of us, they are expressed as some combination of both. And I think that is a very different way to view autism. It puts it in a larger context than just to look at the medical or disability side of it.
That's beautifully said. I think it's important for parents to know that too, the combination of it, because I know that parents do get upset when people say, oh, autism is a gift. On the other side, they get upset when people say, oh, some organizations wanted to cure autism. So to have that combination of saying that, yes, I haven't met anyone that is autistic that's ever said that they don't want to be autistic. Most of my autistic friends love being autistic, but they know that there are certain challenges that go with it.
And I think it's probably fair to say that none of your autistic friends wish to suffer, whether it's from autism or it's from migraine headaches or it's from chronic shoulder pain. I mean, nobody wants to suffer from any of those things. Yeah. And I think that if you identify ways in which autism is implicated in human suffering, I think it's perfectly natural to want to remediate those things. That doesn't mean we want to eliminate a type of people or a person. It means that we don't want to suffer. And I think that is a kind of a fraught conversation, because people can read more into that than is really there.
Yeah.
But I do think that we can, on the one hand, say, yes, we like being autistic. We wouldn't change how we are for anything. But at the same time, we don't want to suffer in a certain way.
Exactly.
And I think that's a hard thing to resolve, because sometimes the suffering is created by the thing that we like. You can be a football player, and you can be very successful, and you can be really proud of your team and your achievements and stuff. And then when you get to be 50 or 60 years old, you have suffering from damage to your joints. Well, what do you say? You don't really want to suffer, but the thing that you did that caused the suffering, you would do it again in a minute. And I think the same thing may be true with certain aspects of autism, where there are ways in which autism causes suffering. We don't want to stop doing certain things, but we don't want to suffer either. And so I think that that's a question for medical science to work on.
And I think these conversations, your talks, make it a lot easier for people that are younger to go through those situations and know, oh, I am not sad or upset because of nothing. Because here's John, who's achieved all this, and he's still saying, look, I've had issues when I was younger. There were challenging situations. It's normal.
Well, I still have issues today. I still misread people, say and do the wrong things. I still have organizational problems. I still have that kind of stuff. But on balance, I also recognize that I have a very powerful ability to see patterns in things, to solve certain kinds of problems. I have a gift of visualization that I can express through photography and creative arts. And if you say to me, well, the thing that gives you that ability also gives you this other thing you don't like, well, they kind of go together. And that's sort of takes us back to the analogy that I was a good football player, but now my joints hurt, and
yes.
And so you have to learn to strike the best balance. And of course, the examples I just gave you imply that you did something really exceptional. There are many people with autism who say, well, I haven't, done anything really exceptional in my life, and yet I still have this suffering, and and it sucks. And I think that there is a significant fraction of the autistic population who would say, if asked, that the ways in which autism causes them suffering considerably outweigh the ways in which they feel autism has conferred advantages upon them. And I think that it's very important that people who do not feel that way, who feel that they have, on balance, more gifts than disabilities, be respectful of the opposite view that people have more disabilities than gifts, and they would rather that not be the case for them.
Yes,
It's not a commentary on anyone else. It's only an observation on the distribution of traits in one's own life.
And perhaps finding some kind of support, whether it is a group with other people that are also autistic and feel the same way, or again, like just speaking to somebody that you trust is very important in that situation.
Yeah, but it is a hard thing because you can get into something like a depression counselor faces constantly, where you think on the one hand, well, I want to be understanding and do what you want to do or whatever to a client, but on the other hand, unless you prod somebody to kind of get out of that zone, they may never get out from under a mantle of depression. So if somebody is thinking this autism thing, it sucks, it's horrible, I can't do anything, that becomes a self-fulfilling thing. If you are so convinced that you can't have a job, can't have a girlfriend, can't have a boyfriend, can't ever drive a car, you tell yourself those things and you will make that true if you do it long enough. And sometimes people respond angrily at me with that. They say, well, it is true. And, and I can only say, well, maybe it was true for you. But maybe there was a time that it wouldn't have been true if you said, I'm going to make it different. And maybe if you try and make it different today, you can make it different. Yeah. And, and maybe you feel like you're beaten by life and you don't even want to try. But if you don't try, you will never get there. That's the really hard thing. And people can say, well, who are you to say I should do this because you're successful at this or that thing? But there was a time in my life when I wasn't successful either. And I certainly can't say how far anyone can go, but I can say that if we have a relentlessly negative mindset, we aren't going to get very far.
John, I'm going to stop. Thank you so much for your chat.
Hopefully you'll have something that's useful.